Global and EU market. Find out about the rapid growth in the use of CBD worldwide and also some of the impeding regulatory changes that may define the future of this exciting industry. CEO Voyager CBD from the United Kingdom, Nick Tulloch.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. It's an absolute pleasure. It's also the first time I've spoken to a conference via Zoom. Probably like the rest of you, I'm far more used to standing in an auditorium and meeting you face to face rather than talking to a computer screen. But it's been a strange year and there's been a lot of learning experience as we go. I've been asked to talk about CBD in the global and EU market. I'll be given 20 minutes. In some ways, it's rather hard to know where to start. There's an awful lot to say. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the trends in CBD use and CBD growth. And then I'm then going to talk a bit about the changes in legislation in some parts of the world, but I think are beginning to set the tone for CBD around the world. And then I'll be very happy to take questions near the end. Just so you know who I am, I have an experience in CBD for about 2 or 3 years now, which I suppose in what is a fairly early stage industry makes me relatively experienced. But I'm sure today in the other speeches you've met people who've had a longer time in the industry. Maybe what makes me a little bit different is the background that I come from. I spent 20 years as an investment banker. Before that I was a lawyer, working in London and elsewhere in the UK. So my approach to CBD has often been from the investment point of view, understanding how CBD will operate within the capital markets around the world, and just thinking about how to create CBD companies that are strictly compliant with legislation, not just in the country that they operate in, but actually in countries that might be relevant to them going forward. My experience in CBD is primarily running a company called Zoetic International. Now that was a long-standing client of mine that was involved in a different industry. It was actually involved in oil and gas when I was an investment banker. I joined the company and I led the turnaround of the company from a US-based oil and gas company into a vertically integrated CBD company. And what is interesting about Zoetic is to this day, it is the only pure play CBD company listed on the London Stock Exchange. For that reason, it gets a huge amount of attention and business has been a tremendous success. I moved on from Zoetic during the course of this year, and I now run a business called Voyager, which is based over in the UK, where I am. Voyager was set up in response to hemp prices around the world falling. In the last 2 years, in some parts of the world, hemp prices are down by about 80%. If you're a CBD user or a CBD buyer, you may have found that actually the price of the products you've been buying has probably not changed all that much. Voyager is a low-cost supplier. At the moment, it supplies purely online, and the concept is to try and bring to consumers that fall in hemp prices and fall in wholesale CBD prices. And Voyager has a range of products that it sells across its website in the UK. Consistent with what I said before, yeah, absolute strict compliance, and that has to be a mantra for the industry. So in the UK, we make no health claims about the product. We display our lab reports online. Any customer can download the lab reports, and we have very clear and detailed labeling as to not only what is in the product, but how it should be used. And I think that's a good policy for really all CBD companies going forward. In terms of the CBD market itself, it was rather difficult to know where to start. If you Google CBD growth or CBD use worldwide, you can come up very quickly with several pages worth of information and statistics. And I suppose the first question is, well, who do you believe and what are the right numbers? It's a challenge because CBD is classed very differently in different parts of the world. And so I'm never convinced that it's possible, and this is no slight on the researchers, but I'm never convinced it's possible to create a very clean picture around the world, comparing like with like, just given the different legislation. But two things are very apparent. The first is that CBD is growing dramatically, is one of the highest growth industries in the world at the moment. The figures I prefer come from Grandview Research, and that shows that over the next 5 years, we think the CBD market around the world will grow at a compound rate of 22% per annum. The second thing that's very apparent is that CBD to date is dominated by North America. Now, there's no surprise here. North America and the US in particular were one of the first regions, first countries to recognize the widespread use of CBD, to legalize CBD, and they have led the world in the innovation that we've seen in recent years around CBD products. And so North America remains the most dominant market in CBD around the world. However, what is also apparent is that other regions are growing far faster. Again, the numbers I prefer, and you'll find different numbers around the internet, but topically for today, the Asian Pacific market, I believe, is the fastest growing region in CBD in the world at the moment. And again, the numbers I prefer suggest that it's grown at about 31% growth rate. So what we will see over the coming years is there will be a catch up around the world, from Europe to Asia to Latin America, as use around the world starts to catch up with that in the US. And I'll come on to that in a moment. The other interesting statistic that I'm quite fond of is CBD's participation in the global health and wellness market. And again, the numbers that I work from suggest that in the coming years, in the next 8 years, CBD could account for 0.15% of the global health and wellness market. You know, not very much, you think, until you realize that actually that market is worth in excess of $4 trillion. So even a tiny fraction of that market just begins to demonstrate how extraordinary CBD could be around the world going forward. I mentioned a moment ago that the US has led the way in terms of CBD use and CBD knowledge. This snapshot here was prepared by CBD Intel, gives a very good idea of how CBD has come into popular use. The darker green shows the level of awareness in the country, and so you can see in the US, in excess of 70% of people are aware of CBD. The UK is a little bit less, that's just in excess of 60%. And if we go sort of to near the bottom of the chart, Japan, just over 15%. Again, no real surprise in these numbers. It demonstrates the growing awareness of countries where CBD has been more accepted or legalized earlier. And I would look at this chart and see the opportunity for catch up. If the US is a benchmark, look at where other countries get to over a period of time. There was a very interesting survey conducted in the UK around about a year ago by one of our newspapers. And what this survey showed when people were asked about CBD is that 80% of those asked thought that CBD and cannabis were one and the same. Of course, cannabis is the name of the plant family. Hemp is one part of that family, and most CBD around the world comes from hemp. But people do equate CBD and cannabis. The second thing the survey showed is that 60% of people in the UK, and bear in mind this is a year ago, 60% of people in the UK thought that CBD was illegal. And that very much flows from the fact that cannabis is not legal in the UK and people were equating the two. I would be fascinated if that same newspaper ran the same survey this year, because I think the change in the industry over 12 months is truly extraordinary. And what I'm finding is that around about 6 million people in the UK have used or are using CBD, and this is becoming very mainstream. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Well, how about reasons for taking CBD? The largest user group of CBD, by quite some margin, is pain management. People take CBD for pain. But this only tells part of the story. Pain can be back pain, it can be headaches, it can be arthritis. So when you look at that pain bar at the top of the chart, bear in mind that it separates out into a number of different areas. And I tend to look at the top three as being a category. Pain, anxiety, and stress. Those are the main areas that people apply CBD for. And that is entirely consistent with our customer base. If I was to compartmentalize the the contacts and the questions that we get from customers, pain is far and away the number one question we get. Will it help for whatever the particular ailment is? And then anxiety and stress as a combination of the next two, very, very much the second and third most popular. What I think is probably most interesting in this chart, or the area I'm most interested in at the moment, is the fourth bar, improving health. There's a lot to learn about CBD, and as scientists and researchers continue to analyze the different applications of cannabinoids out of the plant, we're learning all the time that CBD, through its interaction with our own bodies, has a number of particular benefits. And I suspect over time, as those benefits become more proven and more knowledgeable, we'll find that improving health bar will begin to increase. And already we have customers, and I know people who take CBD every day because they believe it's an important part of their health and well-being, very much as you might take a vitamin every day. So I would certainly watch for that. And then the seventh bar down, skin conditions, and I'll talk about this in just a moment. I think the opportunity for the cosmetic and skincare industry is really fascinating. I'm just going to move on fairly quickly now. Here's a snapshot of the future. What can CBD do? Well, we spoke about pain management. That's actually a fairly small, relative to other markets around the world, fairly small market at just around about $2 billion. So taking a big position in that from a CBD point of view is certainly interesting. But what if CBD became a substitute for other products? I'm not sure it's reasonable to say that CBD is likely to be a substitute for alcohol in the near term, but it absolutely could be a substitute for tobacco. It absolutely could be a substitute for some cosmetic products. And the size of those markets gives you just an idea of just the opportunity that exists in the CBD market. I should say, actually, my former company, Zoetic, was very focused on tobacco alternatives, and you can see the attraction there at a 23.6 billion market. I'm now just going to talk about some of the legislation changes that are happening around the world. I'll start with the US, which has got a very interesting consultation going on at the moment in connection with the 0.3% THC limit. Now, it's fairly well understood and fairly accepted around the world that the difference between hemp and marijuana is the difference in the THC content in the plant. And in the US, and the same is true in Europe more recently, the understanding is that hemp is a plant with no more than 0.3% THC. Now, what the Drug Enforcement Agency is saying in the US at the moment, and this is a consultation, is that every part of the extraction process needs to ensure that the THC limit in the product does not exceed 0.3%. Now, if you look at the start and look at the end of the hemp processing life cycle, hemp starts at less than 0.3% THC, and most CBD products will start at considerably less than that. I mean, our products, for example, are 0.0% THC, but the vast majority will be well below that 0.3% THC limit. However, it is very difficult to extract CBD from the plant without at some point going through a process where you have an intermediate substance, an oil, an extract that will exceed 0.3% THC. In other words, you concentrate the cannabinoids before separating them out. If the DEA's proposals are enforced, you will find that a huge number of processors and extractors will inadvertently be breaking the law, because there'll be a point in time where their extractions will be in excess of 0.3% THC. Now, before we get too hung up on that, the US election in the last 10 days or so overshadowed several votes in states that same night, where there has been an increased move to the legalization of cannabis, and with that, an increased acceptance of CBD. So whilst the DEA's proposals look fairly challenging for the industry, there is a mood in the US to increase acceptance of cannabis and CBD, and it is possible through certain extraction methods to comply with the DEA. But nevertheless, we should recognize that this is going to be a challenge for certain US producers going forward. Here in Europe, we have a different legislation conundrum. The European Union, and that's the dark green countries on the map you can see, the European Union declared last year that CBD was a novel food. Now, what they mean by that is a novel food is a product that was not available for consumption before 1997. The novel foods to be sold, they need to go through a certain testing process.
I'm sorry, Nick, can you please check your audio? You're going in and out. I'm not sure what device you're using.
Is that clearer now? If I'm a bit closer?
Yeah, if it happens again, we'll let you know. We'll let you know if it happens again, but yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the novel foods legislation requires that products that are sold as an ingestible product, a product you take orally, need to have a validated novel foods application in by the 31st of March next year. Now, that was originally a European rule. I'm sure you're all aware that the UK is in the process of leaving the European Union. But the UK has followed those rules, and the regulator in the UK is the FSA. Now, they have mirrored that, and they've said in the UK, to be able to sell CBD, an ingestible CBD product, you need to have that validated novel foods license application. Back in Europe, those applications have been suspended. The European Union is now considering whether CBD should be classified as a narcotic, and if so, it cannot be used as a food ingredient at all. Now, this decision is going to be influenced by a cannabis case that's going to be held in France in the coming weeks, and also a vote due to be held next month by the UN on narcotic drugs. If we take the extreme view, if Europe decides to declare that CBD is a narcotic, I think there's quite an interesting knock-on consequence for the UK. First of all, a number of UK suppliers do source their products from Europe, and they will need to rethink their process, perhaps giving an advantage to those suppliers who receive their products elsewhere. But secondly, and perhaps more interestingly, the FSA's determination to set out a very clear legislation framework for CBD in the UK could place the UK as one of the early countries to set an understandable and obviously clear framework for CBD use, which will make the UK CBD market far more investable than other parts of the world. And so watch this space. This will unfold over the next few months, but there is heightened interest in investment in CBD in the UK in response to these new rules. So following on from that, CBD on the London Stock Exchange, well, CBD has been popular in North American capital markets for quite some time. The Canadians in particular have led the way. But I mentioned earlier that Zoetic, my former company, is the sole listed UK company on the London Stock Exchange. At long last, in September, the FCA, so different to the FSA, which is the Food Standards Authority, the FCA is the financial markets regulator, they announced their proposals on what would be acceptable for a cannabis company on the London Stock Exchange. Not a lot of surprise. Recreational cannabis companies will not be permitted. Companies based in the UK will be favoured solely on the basis that the FCA can analyse and examine their business plans and understand the local rules, which is clearly far more difficult for overseas companies. So I suspect what we'll see in the coming months and maybe year or so is an increase in applications from UK-based CBD and medicinal cannabis companies. I don't believe Zoetic will be the only company on the market for long, but I suspect what we'll find that with a clear legislation framework from the FSA on ingestible CBD and then the FCA on capital market CBD, we begin to set a platform for the UK CBD industry to grow with some level of certainty. So just to conclude then, CBD is becoming a very much a mainstream health supplement. Here in the UK, for example, it exceeds that of the vitamin C and vitamin D markets. It's here to stay, it's not a fad. We're going to see more products and more innovation. What makes companies successful? Well, they need to have a good, reliable supply chain. They need to be forward-looking. They need to understand that regulations are going to change all the time. I've spoken just now about the UK looks like it's beginning to settle on a position. It's not enough to be just a UK company. The true success stories will be global, and so understanding and anticipating regulations around the world will be absolutely important. Clearly, companies have to be compliant. I mean, there are no prizes for any grey area. This is a highly sensitive industry, just given the link to cannabis and certain illicit drugs. All CBD companies need to be absolutely compliant. So just to finish my predictions for next year, I think with the general attraction from THC acceptance and the European approach to novel foods, I think we'll see an increase of CBD isolate products. They're also already the leading products in North America. Europe has tended to be more focused on full spectrum or broad spectrum, but I think we'll find that CBD isolate will become increasingly popular. And then secondly, the world will continue to look for new sources of CBD, lower cost sources. China is already the world's largest producer of hemp, but we're beginning to see countries such as Colombia and North Macedonia, so lesser known countries in this industry, they're beginning to emerge as leading low cost suppliers. And that's both to the Western markets and also as we sort of open up into Asia as well. So those are the things I'd watch for. So I'm very conscious of time. If there is enough time, I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Nick. We actually are out of time, but we would love to hear more from you in our discussion panel later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.